Week number 8 is in the books, and we begin week 9 tonight with the Titans visiting the Steelers on Thursday Night Football. But before we get into all that, let's take a look back at week 8. A little bit of a rebound after a rough week 7. We had a 12-4 record, picking games for all 32 teams, bringing our overall record to 76-46, which feels a whole lot better than where we were last week. Now, typically, we'll look back and talk about some of the highlights from the games in the prior week, but major NFL news literally just dropping yesterday. The Raiders are pretty much committing to cleaning house. Josh McDaniels, their head coach, has been fired. Dave Ziegler, their GM, he was hired alongside Josh McDaniels to pretty much institute the Patriot way. They're in Las Vegas, also fired. Not only that, their offensive coordinator, Mick Lombardi, fired. They are really going for it here. Aiden O'Connell is meant to be the starting quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo has been benched. It is a whole thing there. And now Antonio Pierce is going to serve as the interim head coach. He actually won a Super Bowl as a member of the Giants. So that's definitely going to bring up some interesting things when it comes to picking them. And we'll get into picks later on when we come up on their game. But you gotta figure right after the trade deadline like that, Davis probably was waiting to make these changes until afterwards. You fire your GM and your head coach right before the trade deadline? Hard to make any maneuvers, and I don't think the Raiders did, but even still, it definitely does not help Antonio Pierce and the new Raiders coaching staff in having one less week as he takes over at the helm. So that's a major thing. Definitely, going into week 9, I didn't expect there to be a head coach firing already. The Raiders, I think, have done that 2 other times, firing head coaches earlier than week 9, but it is a rarity in the NFL generally. So that takes over our recap slot at the beginning of this video, and I think it just gets us into our week 9 picks a little bit sooner than normal. So without any further ado, let's get into Thursday Night Football. Titans taking on the Steelers in Pittsburgh. The Titans are coming off not only a surprise win, but a major surprise performance by rookie quarterback Will Levis. 4 touchdowns, 3 thrown to DeAndre Hopkins, and not like 2-yard pass taken to the house, not screen passes, down the field throws, accurate throws. It was legitimately impressive. So that makes for an interesting matchup here, as the Steelers are coming off a loss to the Jags. Minkah Fitzpatrick is out. Coach Tomlin has said Kenny Pickett is a game-time decision. Kenny Pickett has said he's playing. I expect him to play. Cam Hayward, also potentially a game-time decision. I'm only going to go with the Steelers in this because they've beaten the Titans 4 times in a row. I don't think Mike Tomlin has lost to Mike Vrabel, the coach at least. And when it comes down to it, I think the Steelers' defense and their pass rush is just going to be able to do enough to keep Will Levis off balance. Now, the Steelers' run defense has not been good, and Derrick Henry can be a problem. Their defensive numbers generally, they're ranked, I think, 30th in the league right now. It's skewed because their offense has been so bad, and the Titans' defense is fairly good. That could kind of cause trouble. That could definitely be a situation where Derrick Henry ends up with just 35 touches and ends up with 150 yards. Who knows? Maybe that ultimately gets the Titans the win. However, I'm going with the Steelers based on previous track record, history in this matchup, and the mere fact that it is at home. Make sure to set your alarms, by the way, because there is a 9:30 a.m. Eastern kickoff, a game in Germany. Dolphins at Chiefs. Obviously, it's kind of an away game for both teams. The Dolphins traveled early. I don't think the Chiefs have actually even traveled to Germany as of the posting of this video. And one thing to keep in mind, at least this is more with the London games, typically the team that travels later has won. Now, that was not the case for Bills and Jags, though the Jags got to stay there for an extra week. Anyway, something to keep in mind. Now, I think I'm going to pick the Chiefs for kind of 2 reasons here. Number one, when you look at who the Dolphins have beaten, it hasn't been the best of competition, and you got to play who's on your schedule, but the 2 teams they've lost to, the Bills and the Eagles, better competition. They haven't looked nearly as dominant in those 2 games. My other reasoning, though, going back to the Germany game last year, it was the Buccaneers versus the Seahawks. The Buccaneers really weren't a great team all last year. They did make the playoffs, but they finished with a sub 500 record. The Seahawks were a decent team. They were also in the playoffs and ultimately lost in the wildcard round to the 49ers. However, what I wanted to bring up was the Super Bowl-like atmosphere that not only the players, but reporters and coaches and a lot of people talked about in that game. And go figure, who won that game? Which quarterback won that game? Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes has risen to the occasion in Super Bowls, in playoff games, in win-or-go-home situations so often. Even with this recovering from an illness and everything, I think they bounced back from that loss to the Broncos. I think that left a sour taste in their mouth. And again, that big stage game in Germany, that just screams Patrick Mahomes' big game. With the lack of receiving talent out there, I think he and Travis Kelce find a way to get enough offense to beat the Dolphins. Moving into the 1 o'clock Eastern kickoff slot, long kind of analysis of these games so far, and that may continue here with the Vikings visiting the Falcons. So obviously Kirk Cousins had that devastating Achilles tear. He's out for the season. I'm super bummed about that. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch. And they're going to start Jaren Hall this week. They did trade for Josh Dobbs. I don't expect him to be ready. I guess that would be 5 days later. That's just too quick a turnaround to expect him to pick up that offense. The Falcons have turned to Taylor Heinicke finally, after I think fans and media and myself pretty much asking them to do that since week 2. I think because of that, I'm going to go with the Falcons in this one. If it were Kirk Cousins starting, no doubt I'd be picking the Vikings, even with the Falcons defense looking pretty good. But with the pretty much unknown commodity at quarterback, it's hard to pick that, and I do like what Taylor Heinicke brings to that Falcons offense. Gonna pick the Falcons to get a win in this one, send the Vikings back below 500. Bears at Saints. Justin Fields is still not going to play this weekend. It's going to be Tyson Bagent again. His first game against the Raiders looked pretty darn good. Second game against the Chargers opened up pretty good. Things kind of went off the rails quickly, ended up with a big loss. And the Saints actually have been kind of sneaky good this year. Derek Carr has 3 300-yard games in a row, and the Bears defense, while it has some talent, isn't necessarily stellar. So I'm going to go with the Saints in this one. I like what they've kind of gotten going. Their offense lacks some rhythm, and there's some strange stuff going on with Derek Carr calling out teammates and all that. That aside, they got the win in Indy last week, and I think they stack a win here and beat the Bears at home. The further we go, the more fascinating this week's become. Rams visiting the Packers. If you don't know, Matthew Stafford has a thumb injury, and as of the recording of this video, his status is up in the air. If Stafford can't go, it's going to be Brett Rippon, and at least he's got some NFL experience. The other thing that I think is interesting here, the Rams' bye week is week 10, that's next week. They may want to just go into a game where they can maybe win with their backup quarterback. The Packers haven't looked good. Give Stafford more rest, let him ride right on into the bye week, and hopefully be healthy for their week 11 matchup. The Packers, on the other hand, there has not been a lot to go on it since that comeback against the Saints. They just haven't been able to get it going on offense. Their defense generally has kept them in games, and I think that's one thing that worries me if Stafford doesn't go this weekend. If the Packers defense can make enough plays against Rippon and that Rams offense to maybe make it interesting, maybe even get a defensive score. I'm going to go with the Rams because there's a chance Stafford plays. He is known for just kind of gutting it out, playing through injuries, not making a big deal about injuries. One of the toughest quarterbacks in the NFL, no doubt. And my other reasoning is, even if it is Brett Rippon, what better situation to go into than Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua as the receivers to throw to? You're probably not going to throw into nothing but super tight windows. I think they're going to get open enough for Brett Rippon if he goes. I'm going to go with the Rams in this one on the road. I want to give a little room for Stafford to start, but I think they can win even without him. The Commanders are visiting the Patriots this weekend. One interesting thing here, there's been reports that potentially after this season, the Commanders may want to target Bill Belichick, trying to trade for a head coach. Pretty good odds Ron Rivera is going to be out at the end of the year. The Commanders have just traded both of their pass rushers, Chase Young and Montez Sweat. Sweat to the Bears, Young to the 49ers. Not necessarily for picks that made a lot of sense. Only a third-round compensatory pick for Chase Young in particular, that was kind of odd. And this is exactly the type of game, and I said this before when the Patriots got blown out, this is exactly the type of game that the Patriots win. Now, I have been impressed with the Commanders' offense and Sam Howell. I think Belichick and that defense can cook up ways to stop what has been, at times, a very high-flying offense with Howell and Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator. With the removal of those two pass rushers, and with the Patriots generally playing better the last couple of weeks, save for a couple of Mac Jones not-so-great decisions that have led to interceptions, I'm going to go with the Patriots at home here against a Commanders team that may be signaling that they're kind of looking towards 2024, and I feel like the team, the players, they feel that, and it's just enough to give the Patriots the edge. A potential Game of the Week candidate, Seahawks taking on the Ravens at 1 o'clock Eastern. This feels like a 4:25 or primetime game for sure. Both teams, as of now, lead their divisions. The Seahawks are in first place in the NFC West. They're 5-2. The Niners have just dropped to 5-3. Seahawks therefore get the lead, and the Ravens have sole possession of the AFC North. I have really liked the way the Ravens have looked as of late. Lamar Jackson's playing well. That defense is playing well. Whether or not they have their full slate of players, it seems like the Ravens always have an unbelievable amount of injuries. They field a good team, they put a good product out there more often than not, and against a Seahawks team that has shown flashes, but I feel like they don't put a full 4 quarters of quality performance together very often, I think I give the Ravens the edge here. I think it'll be close. Pete Carroll tends to keep games close, but you could make the argument they probably should have lost to the Browns last week, if not for attempting a pass on, I think, 3rd and 3 late in the game. If they just run that and punt it, I think the Browns probably win, and at the very least, that game maybe goes to overtime if the Seahawks can drive down and get a field goal. So, keeping that in mind, the Ravens are a better team than the Browns, and they have their starting quarterback. Picking the Ravens in this one, just not going to overcomplicate things as much as I like to pick the Seahawks. I think I picked them almost every week. Moving to a potentially interesting matchup, Buccaneers visiting the Texans. Both teams coming off losses. The Buccaneers are coming off really getting dominated against the Buffalo Bills last Thursday night. The game ended up being close and actually came down to a Hail Mary that frankly could have been caught if not for a lot of, defensive interference, which is what happens on Hail Mary plays. No complaints there. I think that's totally fine, but the ball was perfectly placed and just no one was able to get to it. The Texans, unfortunately, are on the losing end of Carolina's first win of 2023, and while they didn't look bad in that game per se, neither team could really get any offense going, and Carolina's defense is good. I'm not sure who I want to pick here. One of these teams obviously is going to bounce back. I was going to go with the Buccaneers, I really was. I'm going to pick the Texans. CJ Stroud has just impressed me so much, and they feel like they're a little bit of a up and down roller coaster type of team, more so than the Buccaneers. Both kind of are, but I'm going with the Texans because that's been that pattern they've shown. They win a big game like the Jags game, and then they'll lose a game kind of unexpectedly, like this one, frankly, to the Panthers. So I think they rebound. I think they beat the Buccaneers at home, and that's where the edge is coming from, just simply the home team and that pattern they've had. Feels like still a very full 1 o'clock slate, the final game in that slate. Cardinals visiting the Browns. Both of these teams have major quarterback questions going into the week. The Cardinals are either starting Kyler Murray or rookie 5th round pick Clayton Tune. They've traded Josh Dobbs to the Vikings, and they're, I think, being intentionally unclear about who is going to start, and that is kind of just the competitive advantage of making the opponent prepare for 2 quarterbacks. The Browns, I don't necessarily know that they're doing the same thing. They are also being rather vague about who's going to start, but that's been the case throughout this whole saga of this Deshaun Watson injury, and I just don't expect him to play this week. It's gotten to that point. I have, for I don't know how many weeks now, generally kind of started to lean towards maybe Watson's going to play. I haven't seen any reason to think he is going to play this weekend, so I'm going to operate under the assumption that PJ Walker is going to start for the Browns again. He is supposed to start if Watson can't go. And at the end of the day, I don't know that I needed to lay all that out. I think it's important information to, talk about as we get into this. But I'm going to go with the Browns either way, especially in a matchup where the quarterbacks are completely up in the air. Who knows what's going to go on? We're just going to pick the team with the better roster. And even if Kyler Murray comes back, and even if it is Kyler Murray versus PJ Walker, Murray's going to be rusty. This isn't the defense you want to come back against and face. Now, they have shown they can be had the last couple of weeks, more so against the Colts than the Seahawks, but the Hawks were up 14-0 early. I don't think they're going to bring Kyler Murray back with Myles Garrett potentially bearing down on him. So I think it ends up being Clayton Tune, and whether it's PJ Walker, whether it's Deshaun Watson, or somehow if Dorian Thompson-Robinson ends up playing, I'm going to pick the Browns to get the win at home, going to 5-3. With this crazy quarterback situation, like I said, it's a great roster. If they could figure out their quarterback slot, they could really make some noise in the playoffs. And into the 4:05 Eastern kickoff slot we go with the Frank Reich revenge game, or potentially revenge game. Colts visiting the Panthers. I think at first glance, the Colts are sort of the obvious choice. They've got a much better record. They've got a better roster generally. But that Frank Reich aspect, it definitely makes me pause. They're coming off a win over the Texans and number 2 overall pick CJ Stroud, and I think that game had a little bit of, prove a point type aspect to it, where whether it was Frank Reich or whether it was the GM or whether it was owner David Tepper, I think there was a real push to try to show the world that they made the right pick in Bryce Young at number 1 overall. Now, I don't necessarily think that's the case, but that's neither here nor there. Won't really be 100% known for 3 to 5 years down the line as these quarterbacks have their careers play out. Anyway, I've talked myself into it. I'm going to pick the Panthers. I haven't picked them all year. I like that Frank Reich revenge game type arc here. I think he's going to cook up enough, and no doubt he feels like he was unfairly let go last year. I don't love it, but every now and then you got to go out on a limb. I'm going to pick the Panthers to beat the Colts. Boy, would that send them reeling, but I may regret it. I'm going to go with the Panthers. It is game after game of interesting situations. Giants visiting the Raiders. We talked at the beginning of the video about the Raiders pretty much cleaning house, firing their head coach, their offensive coordinator, their GM, and bringing in an interim head coach with no head coaching experience, but with some playing experience. That is potentially the wrinkle to this game. The Giants' defense has played really well. The Giants' offense has been the opposite of that. Saquon Barkley's been a bright spot, but other than that, -9 net passing yards last week. Like, my goodness. The Raiders, on the other hand, they haven't looked good in any way, shape, or form. Aiden O'Connell's going to start. Complete new overhaul of the staff right now. The one thing, and I'm looking back to the Rich Bisaccia days when John Gruden was fired, kind of forced out there in Vegas. That team rallied around Rich Bisaccia, and they made the playoffs. They were 10-7. They gave the Bengals all they could handle in the wild card round. I just don't know that there's enough pieces in Vegas. Daniel Jones has been cleared for contact. He's slated to return this week against the Raiders. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The Giants have looked better, quite frankly, with Tyrod Taylor under center, and of course, he's also hurt. I gotta pick the Giants. It just feels like kind of that same situation as the Commanders earlier. The Raiders and the players have to feel that they're kind of giving up on the season a little bit. Just firing everybody this early on. I think it's going to be maybe a situation where they do rally around Antonio Pierce and get some wins, but I don't think it's going to be this week. I think this quickly, a turnaround like that, basically getting hired on a Wednesday and going to coach a game on a Sunday, I'm going to go with the Giants here. They've been sneaky good despite their record, and I just think it's too much for the Raiders to overcome with everything going on. And if the Seahawks Ravens is not the game of the week this week, I think this will be. The Cowboys visit the Eagles at 4:25 Eastern. This should be a really good game. Looking back to last year, each team faced the opposing backup quarterback once and won that game. The Eagles beat the Cowboys when Cooper Rush was starting, and the Cowboys beat the Eagles when Gardner Minshew was starting. So I don't know that there's much we can glean from last year's matchup, but what I do know is playing at the Link is not easy. In a divisional matchup where both teams are extremely talented, both teams have playoff aspirations for sure, and the Cowboys probably see an opening right now in the NFC as a whole. The Niners are slipping, the Eagles have lost a game, the NFC North, other than the Lions, hasn't had much going on, and the Lions lost that game big time to the Ravens. But despite all that I just said, the Eagles at home, with the Jalen Hurts injury going on, I just think it's too much. I like what the Cowboys have done generally this year, and in all likelihood I pick them if this game is played in Dallas, but can't pick against the Eagles at home. They're 7-1 for a reason. They were the last undefeated team last year, last undefeated team this year, and I just think they're going to be able to overcome whatever Dallas throws at them. Dallas has won games, generally speaking, by huge margins. Other than the Charger game, I think every game they've won is basically a blowout, and I just don't see the Eagles allowing that to happen. They have played in pretty much exclusively close games, and I think that helps them out here, picking the Eagles to win this divisional matchup. So finally, moving to Sunday Night Football, the Bills visit the Bengals. This is definitely a matchup that I think everybody's going to have their eyes on. Of course, this was the matchup with the Damar Hamlin situation last year in the regular season. They did play in the playoffs in Buffalo, and the Bengals beat them rather handily. And even in the Damar Hamlin game, the Bengals, I think they were winning 7-3 and were driving again, if I'm not mistaken. So, keeping that history in mind, and keeping the fact that Joe Burrow finally looked like Joe Burrow last week. They beat the 49ers. And that defense that has shown some cracks, but is still very good. Burrow looked phenomenal in that game. And the Bills have been a little wobbly. They've managed to get to 5-3, but it's not the strongest 5-3 I've ever seen. So, just looking at the two teams right now, looking at the matchup history last year and how they matched up against each other and what Burrow was able to do against the Bills defense, I got the Bengals winning this one. After a 1-3 start, they could be 5-3 going into Week 10. And for the very last game of Week 9, we have the Chargers visiting the Jets on Monday Night Football. This is another one that I think is going to be tough to pick. This is a high-powered offense, or at least an offense that has the capabilities of being a high-flying offense, versus a very good defense. The Jets defense has really been responsible for all of their wins in some way, shape, or form. I know Zach Wilson made the big plays down at the end there to tie the game and then ultimately win the game in overtime, but it was their defense that even allowed them to be in that situation to begin with. It's the Jets at home, playing a Chargers team that just has a tendency to mess it up, but they did put on a good performance against the Bears, who aren't necessarily the best of competition last week. I think the Jets are going to find a way to pull it off. They've been doing it so far this year. They're 4-3. I don't love it. I feel like I want to pick the Chargers, but at what point do you just look at an elite defense and say they're going to be able to carry this team, and if the offense puts up 13 points, they might be able to win it. I think the offense will need at least 17 in this one, but I'm going to go with the Jets. This is going to be a really interesting week. I think this could be another, 70-plus win percentage week. I don't even know how many games there are this week. A couple of teams are on byes. I think this could be another 5-8 type week like we had in Week 8. So hopefully it's the former. And to recap those picks that hopefully are going to go well for us this week, I've got the Steelers beating the Titans tonight on Thursday Night Football. I've got the Chiefs over the Dolphins in Germany. Got the Falcons beating the Vikings. Saints over the Bears. Rams beating the Packers. Patriots over the Commanders. Got the Ravens beating the Seahawks. The Texans over the Buccaneers. Browns over the Cardinals. Panthers beating the Colts. Got the Giants beating the Raiders. Eagles over the Cowboys. Bengals beating the Bills, and the Jets finding a way against the Chargers on Monday night. Long video again here, but there was so much to talk about. all of these games, or most of them anyway, had some kind of little wrinkle to them, whether it's the potential for the Raiders to rally around interim head coach Antonio Pierce, the Frank Reich revenge game, quarterback questions in Cardinals, Browns, and so on, all throughout the Week 9 slate. So looking forward to a good weekend of football. Very much intrigued for tonight's matchup, Titans visiting the Steelers, and we go right away on Sunday, 9:30 a.m. Eastern kickoff, to that great game, Dolphins Chiefs in Germany. So let me know what you guys are most excited for this week's games. And I think of all the games, there's so many like game of the week contenders, but Dolphins Chiefs is one I should mention as well. Who do you guys have winning that one? Let me know in the comments below. And I think on that note, that's going to do it for this video. So as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.